There you go. Here we are.
We should do that.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and a Chag
Shalom,
Sameach as well. It's so wonderful to be with my beloved colleagues, David Beckman and Brian, of course. Thank you so much, and thank all of you who are going to learn with us this morning. Let's begin by thanking God for the gift of learning Torah together. Page 63. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'harena Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Torah b'finu u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael, v'nihiyeh anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzei amcha beit Yisrael, kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha l'shma. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah li'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So again, Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. There is obviously a lot of emotion and feeling and energy in our country right now. And there's also a lot of emotion and feeling and energy in the Jewish holiday cycle right now. And this morning, I want to see whether the emotion and energy and feeling of the Jewish holiday cycle helps us understand and respond to what we're feeling with regard to our country. So let me frame that we have two halves to this class. The first half comes from a pretty utterly brilliant Yom Kippur Day sermon that I heard online, a live stream service from San Francisco, from a shul called The Kitchen, where our sons are members, Nat and Davide. And the rabbi who gave this sermon, so I'm going to give you the sources behind the sermon that she gave, is Rabbi Jessica Kate Meyer, who was a classmate of Lisa's at Hebrew College, went to rabbinical school there. She worked with my son-in-law, Davide, for his conversion, and then she married Nat and Davide on Labor Day, September 7th, at their home, Zoom wedding. And Nat and Davide had an Aliyah on Yom Kippur Day, which is why we were tuning in. I was just expecting to be watching their Aliyah and then collapse for a few hours before our Mincha Ne'ilah service started. But she started talking, and oh my God, here's what she notices, and we'll look inside. She points out that there's 2 months that separate Tisha B'Av from Yom Kippur, and both are fast days. And she points out that the character of the fast days and the character of the texts that give rise to those fast days couldn't be more different. That the character of the fast day of Tisha B'Av is we are doomed, we are defeated, we are forlorn, we are lost, we are hopeless. And therefore, the fast of Tisha B'Av is a fast to mourn being doomed and defeated. She points out that the fast of Isaiah, the fast of Yom Kippur, begins with the project that there's a lot of work to do. There's hungry people, there's injustice, there's homeless people, etc. But it's an entirely different character. She points out that in Isaiah's prophecy, there's a plethora of action verbs: feed, shelter, help, it's unlock. And that the purpose of the fast of Isaiah is not to mourn what is lost. It's to ignite in us a will to fix it and to change it. And then she just brought this home so memorably. She points out that she has Canadian citizenship and that her friends and family are urging her, renew your Canadian passport. Go to Canada now. It's the 1930s. And that the Jews who survived were the Jews who called it early. The Jews who today have children and grandchildren are the Jews who called it early. And the Jews who said, no, it'll be okay, they're all dead. They're dead, and they don't have children and grandchildren. Only if you call it early will you survive. And she's getting this, you've got a Canadian passport, you're one of the lucky ones, just go. And she says that if she does that, that's the fast of Tisha B'Av. We're doomed and defeated. But we are reading the fast of Isaiah, there's something we should do, and she doesn't want to renew her Canadian passport. She wants to renew our country. So the first part was we're going to look at Eicha and Isaiah and think about the different tones and what they summon from us. But then here's the next piece, which is our contribution to this ongoing conversation, like a Talmud page. Her sermon ends on Yom Kippur Day. Four days later, it's Sukkot, and today is Sukkot. And so you go 2 months from Tisha B'Av to Yom Kippur, and you go 4 days from Yom Kippur to today, Sukkot. And the emotion of our day is simcha, is joy and rejoicing. And when we look in the Torah, it tells us to rejoice. And the question is, how do you go from, oh my God, we have so much work to do, to repair and to restore and to redeem, and how do you go from that in 4 days to rejoice? That's our big root wrap. So, Dan, I'm going to ask if you'll begin. Our first text is from Eicha, from Lamentations. It tends to go on and on, but I want you to read the page 1 of it, which is the first part, and then I'd like you to read the 5th chapter, which is the end. So we're going to begin with the beginning of Lamentations, we're going to begin, and then we're going to conclude with the end of Lamentations, and I just want to get a sense of the flavor and the feel of this book.
Okay. Alas, lonely sits the city once great with people. She that was great among nations is become like a widow. The princess among states is become a thrall. Bitterly she weeps in the night, her cheek wet with tears. There is none to comfort her. Of all her friends, all her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. Judah has gone into exile because of misery and harsh oppression. When she settled among the nations, she found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places. Zion's roads are in mourning, empty of festival pilgrims. All her gates are deserted. Her priests sigh, her maidens are unhappy. She is utterly disconsolate. Her enemies are now the masters, her foes are at ease, because the Lord has afflicted her for her many transgressions. Her infants have gone into captivity before the enemy. Gone from fair Zion are all that were her glory. Her leaders were like stags that found no pasture. They could only walk feebly before the pursuer.
Okay, so that's the beginning. That's the opening gambit of Eicha. In your own words, what word picture does Eicha's beginning paint of Jerusalem and of the Jewish people's homeland?
Isolation, sadness. You said defeat.
Defeat, right. Isolation, sadness, defeat, mockery.
Hopelessness, yeah.
Hopelessness, right. Mockery. Other nations are mocking, defeated, deserted, bitterly, weeping, crying. A lot of tears. We're back to the tears from last week. Okay? And then the question is there any, trajectory? Like often in a Haftorah, there will be a lot of low points, but the typical move for Haftorah is to end with an uptick. So let's take a look at the end. Read page 3, Dan, chapter 5. Remember, O Lord. And the question is there any hope at the end of Eicha?
Okay. So
we're on page 3, chapter 5. Remember, O Lord.
Remember, O Lord, what has befallen us. Behold and see our disgrace. Our heritage has passed to aliens, our homes to strangers. We have become orphans, fatherless. Our mothers are like widows. We must pay to drink our own water, obtain our own kindling at a price. We are hotly pursued, exhausted. We are given no rest. We hold out a hand to Egypt, to Assyria for our fill of bread. Our fathers sinned and are no more, and we must bear their guilt. Slaves are ruling over us, with none to rescue us from them. We get our bread at the peril of our lives because of the sword of the wilderness. Our skin glows like an oven with the fever of famine. They have ravished women in Zion, maidens in the towns of Judah. Princes have been hanged by them. No respect has been shown to elders. Young men must carry millstones, and youth stagger under loads of wood. The old men are gone from the gate, the young men from their music. Gone is the joy of our hearts. Our dancing is turned into mourning. The crown has fallen from our head. Woe to us that we have sinned.
Okay, so now we're near the end, but you see the desolation, it continues. In the Torah, kind of the category that is saddest are widows and orphans, and God loves widows and orphans, so the entire Jewish people are widows and orphans, right? And instead of having slaves, we are slaves. We're kind of like, it's an echo back to Egypt. We are slaves, we're widows, we're orphans, hopeless. And now comes the end, Let's just see if there's any hope at the end of Eicha.
Because of this, our hearts are sick. Because of these, our eyes are dimmed. Because of Mount Zion, which lies desolate, jackals prowl over it. But you, O Lord, are enthroned forever. Your throne endures through the ages. Why have you forgotten us utterly? Forsake us for all time. Take us back, O Lord, to yourself, and let us come back. Renew our days as of old. For truly you have rejected us, bitterly raged against us. Take us back, O Lord, to yourself, and let us come back. Renew our days as of old.
So that's the end. So what would you say about the end of Eicha? Is there any hope? If you're reading Eicha and you're thinking, what can I do? What's your move if Eicha is advising you?
I mean, there is the tiniest spark of, Hashivenu Adonai Alecha. That God is enthroned forever. God is always here. So since God is all powerful, there's still this holding out, even in the most desolate, desperate moments. There's still that holding out of a tiny little spark of hope, I think, right at the very, very end.
But what do you do? In other words, that's kind of a prayer. It's all in God's hands.
Right.
So we're utterly passive. We're waiting, we're passive, we're defeated, and we're waiting for God to come in on a white horse and save the day. That's kind of the best hope. Yeah. Any other reads of Eicha before we talk about what it says to our time?
One thing I find interesting in this lens is I always experience that as like a Haftarah upnote, that line. And in this reading, I was like, that's not at all positive, that we used our Jewish tradition and the way that we always at the end of a Haftarah have an upnote, and we put that verse there. But if you read it in context, it feels very much like just a desperate cry with no answer. Mm-hmm.
And it's also that last line, the Hashivenu, is a toupee. It's clearly not the original. Yeah. The way it originally ends is bitterly raged against us. Right? The end is you've bitterly raged against us. The end, have a good life. And then whoever was the editor said, okay, we'll throw in Hashivenu as a toupee of some kind of hope. Mm-hmm. What is the message of the fast of Eicha? We're doomed and defeated. I mean, what is the message of this to us and to our land now, if any?
I mean, I want to throw in just a little plug for God here, right? It's not, it's not completely passive. That it is indeed a putting ourselves in the hands of God, not in the sense of we give up, but in the sense of we need you, we want you, we need you in our lives. Return us to you. Help us find our path back to righteousness and wholeness and all those good things that Isaiah is later going to do, where it's sort of the preschool step there, in the sense of before I can walk, before I can even begin to do those things, I need to ask for help from God to inspire me to find the courage in myself to do that repentance and become that kind of person.
So do you guys basically agree or disagree with Rabbi Jessica's fundamental read that this is the fast of we are doomed and defeated, and it's the fast of mourning? I'm fasting because I am mourning the fact that I am doomed and defeated. Do you read it that way, or do you read it a different way?
Defeated, yes, maybe not doomed because of that, the editor throwing in the repetition of the last line. But
I think it's hard to argue that Tisha B'Av is not a fast of we have been doomed, we have been decimated. The question you have to ask there is then, okay, so what's the point of that? Why do we go there? We go there to name those places and spaces in our lives that are in that utter, complete devastation. And, we're not actually just going to go and visit there and say, like, all right, there it is, so, we're going to leave it there. Yes. That's not where Tisha B'Av leaves it. Tisha B'Av is on a trajectory towards Yom Kippur.
So here's where the rubber hits the road. Do you see, this is whoever wrote Eicha, Jeremiah, whoever wrote it, using word pictures to paint devastation. If you were writing a modern Eicha about America today in 2020, would you have material? What kinds of word pictures would you paint today? What would be the Eicha of America? America's Eicha in 2020.
What's interesting to me, I felt like this was it. What were you going to say?
No, go ahead.
Go, Galiza, and then Elias.
I was reading, so much of what exists in our world fits into this text. It's every year shocking that these words still fit, and I think it's a continuum. It's not, you can't compare it. It's like this is our world. Young people under millstones barely making it, people in the gig economy trying to make it, the environment burning up, like it's all here.
No, I have a very different take on all this. Let me do like a metaphor and comparison here. I watch movies from all over the world in different languages, from France, from Italy, from Israel, from you name it, South America, American. And one thing that is very distinctive about the rest of the world and American Hollywood movies is that the American Hollywood movies always have a happy ending, all right? They kill each other or the horrible things, and at the end, everybody's celebrating around the table, all right? Happy endings. And Eja is not a happy ending. And I'm completely fine with not happy endings because this is the cruel reality. Anybody who ever left their countries, all right? It's painful enough to leave your country because of your own decision. It's unimaginable to leave your country because somebody destroys it and you have to be exiled. And there is nothing. I mean, I can look back at my own experience. I see my family down there. Yes, Argentina is horrible. It's much worse than America. It's not like the rabbi who has the option to go to Canada. Nobody will say to me, go back to Argentina. Anyways, but my point is that, yes, my point is that I can look and I see, yeah, things are still working there. You know, my family is there, my friends are there, seminario, my home, you know, where I study is there. People in the 586 had nothing, you know. Not only that other people were taking over, but it was completely destroyed and gone, all right? So I know that you are trying to get a point, and the rabbi from the kitchen also has a point, but it's impossible to compare a text that reflects the pain of destruction and loss, which ends on a fast, than Yom Kippur, because they have completely different things. And to me, it's not comparable to what is happening in America today. I mean, we have a lot of troubles, we have a lot of struggles, but it's incomparable to the destruction and exile of the Jewish people.
Yeah, so, okay. Well, I think there definitely are different modes here, the Tisha B'Av mode and the Yom Kippur mode. I think, though, that the essential point that I get from this is utter desolation in our country, which I sense. In other words, when you see pictures of lines of people in cars, miles, and why are they waiting hours and hours and hours and hours in a car for food? There's going to be some free food. You get some potatoes and onions if you wait for hours and hours and hours. And there's so many people who sign up for that deal that by the time they get to the potatoes and onions, there's no more potatoes and onions. That's Echa. Okay, let's move to Isaiah. So I'll just frame this real quick. She points out all of these action words, right? That the fast that God wants is not a fast of mourning and weeping and crying. The fast that God wants is an action. God wants our fast to inspire action, and then all these verbs: unlock, untie, let the oppressed go free, break off, share your bread, take the poor into your house. And she points out, and it was very effective in her sermon, just the command form in the Hebrew: pateach, hater, shalach, tanateku, paros, tavi. In other words, don't just mourn and lament. I don't want your mourning and lamenting. I want you to pateach, I want you to hater, I want you to shalech, I want you to nateku, to paros, to tavi. Change stuff, right? And that it's fundamentally about inspiring action to fix what's broken, not to mourn what's broken. So here's my question. What does this piece of Isaiah fix what's broken? And you're fasting, you're doing Yom Kippur to get inspired to fix what's broken. What claim does it make on you today in 2020?
I love Elias's point because it feels like it pulls out the challenge of the power dynamic who are we in each case? When we're experiencing Tisha B'Av, who we are people who don't have the capacity to act. The context of Isaiah on Yom Kippur are people who have the capacity but not the will. And I think one of the challenges of our time is trying to figure out who we are now. Are we looking out at our place? And this is part of the brilliance of the sermon, is that are we people today who perceive ourselves as doomed, bereft, a nation destroyed around us? Or can we tap into that sense of our own power and understand ourselves as people who actually, as Elias beautifully pointed out, in America, are certainly not in as dire of situations as people have been in the past, and do have power to heed the call of Isaiah.
Right. Are we in an Eicha mode or Isaiah mode? And that's a fundamental question, right? Before we get to Sukkot, which has a whole other move, joy out of all of this brokenness, joy in 4 days, we'll get to that. Anybody want to comment on what Isaiah summons in you, makes you feel, makes you want to do?
I have something
Dan?
to say. So, Elias was talking just before we started class about
Nusach.
About Nusach. Also, and Elisa too, but also about Kohelet, which comes up this year on Shmini Atzeret, and he's talking about the opposites: a time to live, a time to die, etc. But then you think about that, as what you just said, Michelle, is exactly that. Is what Ecclesiastes is saying, that there's a time that we can't act, and then there's a time that we can act, and that's we have to live with both of them. So we need that moment, like I think what we're saying here is we need that moment where we're just gone, we're just done, we're defeated, we can't move. And then finally we can eventually get past that and then get to the point where we can move. The other thing I was thinking about is that, we have that other fast in the middle. We have Tzom Gedalia. And there's a message in there too. I think that message bridges both of them. We have the message of we're doomed. We have the message of we can't let other people rule over us, which is what Gedalia is all about. So let's take that next step, which is Yom Kippur. I think that kind of bridges that gap.
Yeah, but interesting enough, historically, they come in the opposite order.
I know, right? I know that.
Isaiah is the first one who lived in the 8th or 7th century. He hasn't seen the distraction. Okay. Then Tzom Gedalia comes before Tisha B'Av, and then Tisha B'Av. Right. Sorry, Alisa.
No, it's fine. I was also, one of the things I think is very interesting if you look, and this is where I thought you were going, so nusachically is there's a special melody for Eicha that's only used for Eicha.
Right.
And that feels like a very thoughtful and intentional process on the part of our ancestors to say, we don't do this. Outside of this day, we don't do this. You have one day to really feel all your heartache and all your brokenness and to feel worthless and like you can't make a difference. One day. You get that. You get it. It's so through that you get an entire new melody that you have to sing on that day. And this fast
It's like
Isaiah,
the Gilmore Girls when Rory breaks up. Rory breaks up.
That's exactly what we all would have thought.
Wes, can I say something to you? I love you. But, I have 2 boys, and you keep talking about the Gilmore Girls.
The Gilmore Girls.
What on earth is the Gilmore Girls? I've never seen that show, never crossed my mind to watch that show.
No, but the Gilmore Girls is Shakespearean in this moment. Because Rory, and I think really links up with Eicha, because Rory breaks up, and she wakes up after the breakup, and all she wants to do is sleep and eat ice cream. And her mother says, I still remember this word, I watched it when Jordy was, 7, Jordy's 25 now. You can wallow for 1 day. You can wallow for 1 day. It's Gilmore Girls. You can wallow for 1 day. Keep going, I'm sorry.
So then this Isaiah, it does not have a unique melody, right? Like if you're an alien and you come to our synagogue and you listen to any Haftarah reading, you're going to think they're all the same. Like every week, the same melodies, and this fits right in. In other words, this fast is both unique and the same as every single week. Every single week, we're asked to move from our positions of comfort. Every prophet asks us to get off of our chairs and do something of action. And so that's a really interesting, right? It is unique because we read it on Yom Kippur, and I think because we fast, which makes us feel desolate. It makes our heads hurt and our bellies are empty, and we feel desolate. And in the face of that, I think these words strike us in a different way.
Okay. So guys, now here's the really interesting move. So Rabbi Jessica Kate Meyer, thank you for your incredible Torah. And now we're on our own. Now we have to move from Isaiah in 4 days to joy. So here's the first thing I want to do. There's 2 passages in the Torah that deal with Sukkot and joy. And the first thing I want to do is just at the level of Pshat, I want to ask you if you sense a difference in these 2 passages. So, Elisa, would you read on page 6 and 7 the Leviticus one, and then I'm going to ask you to read the Deuteronomy one.
Yeah,
so
verse
39, mark on the 15th day.
Mark on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the yield of your land, you shall observe the festival of the Lord to last 7 days, a complete rest on the first day, and a complete rest on the 8th day. On the first day you shall take the product of hadar trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. You shall observe it as a festival of the Lord for 7 days in the year. You shall observe it in the 7th month as a law for all time throughout the ages. You shall live in booths 7 days. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths in order that future generations may know that I made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I, the Lord your God.
Thank you. So you see in this first version 3 key points about Sukkot. One is it's an agricultural move. You gather in your bounty. 2, it's a historical move. You were during the time of the wilderness, you stayed in these huts. Agricultural, it's historical. And then the third is, what bridges them is you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, right? And which is why, Usmachtem lifnei Adonai Elohechem, Shivat Yamim, it's known as Zman Simchatenu, okay? Now, let's just move over real quick, to page 8. And what do you sense about Deuteronomy, and do you sense a different resonance? Starting with verse 13.
After the ingathering from your threshing floor and your vat, you shall hold the feast of booths for 7 days. You shall rejoice in your festival with your son and daughter, your male and female slave, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow in your communities. You shall hold a festival for the Lord your God 7 days, in the place that the Lord will choose. For the Lord your God will bless all your crops and all your undertakings, and you shall have nothing but joy.
Okay.
Can I say something here, because it's so funny. Our tradition is so funny. So we are reading in Yom Kippur, okay? Let the oppressed go free. And then we read in Sukkot, hey, let's all be happy. Bring your slaves with you. Hey, just in case you don't know what I mean, bring your male slaves and the female slaves, and let's celebrate. What's going on here?
Yeah, that's okay. So exactly. So the question is, if you take Isaiah seriously, then you just got so much work to do, right? And you can't solve any problem in 4 days. You definitely cannot solve serious social problems in 4 days. You can't solve economic injustice in 4 days. You can't solve slavery in 4 days. You can't solve widows and orphans in 4 days. You can't solve insecurity and uncertainty in 4 days. And yet, 4 days later, all those, the slaves that should have been freed are still slaves, and the strangers and the fatherless are still strangers and fatherless, and the widows are still widows, and you're supposed to be rejoicing. So here's my question. What's up with that? And what could I'll give you, I think, an interpretation from Shai Held that's beautiful. Whether it addresses your question is not clear. What's your own answer to your question? How do we move from Isaiah, you've got to fix what's broken, which is deep and systemic and long-standing, and 4 days later, those problems are obviously unsolved, and we're rejoicing.
Yeah, just to be serious for once.
No, it's a very serious critique.
For being serious for once. What I'm saying is that I think it's part of the human condition that we all of us struggle with different things, okay? We all have our dark, things, interiors. And I'm sure that all of us, when we are praying in Yom Kippur, we say to ourselves, I can do better. I can do better. From now on, I'm going to do this. From now on, I'm going to do that. And then the week comes after Yom Kippur, and you get it set in your old ways. All right, this is the message to me of this connection between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, that we all have good intentions, but sometimes it's so hard to get out of our own,
Well, Elias, that's beautiful and powerful. Let me just ask you one question. So I hear that you're stuck. We're stuck. Humans are stuck. But how does that therefore lead to joy? Is the message you're stuck, you can't actually fix what's broken in a deep way, so pass the schnapps and rejoice? What's the message?
I think there's an answer, which is, I think the answer is that that in order to be able to go from the darkest to action, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that there's much to be thankful for. That there still is, even though the world is broken, there's still plenty to be thankful and joyous of in this world. And when we get to that point where we can celebrate what's good, that helps us motivate us towards being better towards the good.
Okay, so that now you have just, Dan Nesson, thank you. You have just articulated to me, I think, the $64,000 question, right? Here's my question at a meta level. Does Sukkot, is Sukkot a helpful response to Isaiah's pain? Or does Sukkot numb us and inebriate us so that we don't even see Isaiah's pain? So let me just frame that for you.
You're brilliant.
I'm sorry?
Brilliant. You're brilliant. Beautiful question.
But here's take a look at page 9. So by the way, quotidian is just my favorite word. I just love quotidian. Quotidian means ordinary. Wallace Stevens, the poet, talks about the malady of quotidian, and this talks about the joy of quotidian. So Michelle, would you read Shai Held? It's short and it's super powerful.
From the beginning?
Yeah, please.
When Leviticus 23 offers a portrait of the holiday cycle, it attaches a special mandate to Sukkot. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Of all the sacred days of the year, Sukkot alone is explicitly linked to joy. In terms of the holiday's agricultural dimension, the link is obvious. During this fall festival, the harvest is being gathered and Israel is thankful for its bounty. But what about the historical dimension? What historical event is the source of Sukkot joy? Pesach recalls and reenacts the Exodus from Egypt. Shavuot, in the rabbinic imagination, recalls and reenacts the revelation at Mount Sinai. Each of these two festivals marks one of Judaism's foundational events. Which orienting moment does Sukkot recall? The striking answer is that Sukkot harkens back to no particular event at all. There is something profoundly surprising here. The festivals focused on the two defining events in Jewish history and theology, Exodus and Sinai, are not the ones Judaism most powerfully connects with joy. The most joyous days of the year do not commemorate earth-shattering, world-transforming events, but rather the arduous and protracted journey from Exodus to destination. To be sure, in the biblical account, God is radically present with Israel in the desert, and memories of God's providential care lie at the heart of the holiday. And yet Judaism does not primarily connect to joy, to the great moments when God interrupts history and turns things upside down, but rather to something far more sober, to the attempt to live with God in the day-to-day march through the desert, through history, and through life. This is the joy of the quotidian and the pedestrian, the utterly non-ecstatic. This is the joy of commitment and responsibility rather than of uplift and exhilaration. Covenant is not just about intimacy. It is also and fundamentally about faithfulness. Note the wonderful paradox here. Sukkot is the holiday that celebrates the non-holiday, the yontif that delights in the chol, the sacred time that celebrates regular time, and the festival that celebrates not the high points, but the morning after, and the morning after that as well. Like a good marriage, the covenant between God and Israel requires moments of excitement and jubilation, but it ultimately depends on the joy of simply waking up on a less than eventful morning and going about the business of life.
I just want to thank Shai Held for that. So let me just frame this.
Really beautiful.
I just think this is so important. I think to me, this is the big existential question, okay? So you read Isaiah and oh my God, action verbs. I gotta free, I gotta shelter, I gotta help, I gotta sever the bonds, I gotta do. I got a verb. I got to be more verby, okay? You read Shai Held on Sukkot, and I have to find joy in the ordinary, which means that I can fulfill my responsibilities for Sukkot, and what Shai Held is talking about, the covenant of ordinary joy, if I get up in the morning, answer some emails, unpack the dishwasher, sort the laundry, come in and daven shacharit, answer some emails, go home and do a workout, have a day, come home at the end of the night, I'll do Shira's shopping list at Whole Foods, come back, do the evening service, go home, have a glass of scotch, and talk to my wife and daughter. And it's utterly prosaic. I'm not in Paris, I'm not in Jerusalem, I'm not on a honeymoon, I'm not on an airplane, I'm not on the Alps, I'm at 40 Montrose Street and 385 Ward Street. That's an ordinary day. Now that, by the way, that's my specialty. I love ordinary days. But here's my question. Have I made the world any better? So I'm wondering, does Sukkot, as Shai Held explains it, kill Isaiah? And let me just deepen the question, because here's what is not in Shai Held's interpretation of Sukkot, right? So what Shai Held just said is, whatever an ordinary day looks like for you, sushi and children, whatever an ordinary day looks like for you, hanging out with Solomon, whatever an ordinary day looks like for you, raising your kids, being with Emma, doing your thing, ordinary day, find joy, you're good, okay? But that's not, take a look at the last thing. I just happen to, and there's 1,000 of these, but this is from Jalsa on page 11, right? The days of, dear friends, the days of awe call us to take a necessary inventory of ourselves. Rosh Hashanah isn't just about being new, it's about change. Since March, Jalsa has worked to make change around the issue of voter suppression. We hope that you and your congregations want to join us from now until November 3rd. In other words, Jalsa is saying, enough with your Whole Foods grocery run, and enough with answering your stupid emails, and enough with answering these prayers that, prayers, fine. But there's voters that are going to be suppressed. Why don't you get off your butt and start fighting that? That's what Isaiah is talking about. So it feels to me like there's two different moves. Isaiah wants you to do Jalsa, and Shai Held and Sukkot wants you to just have a nice meal at home. And they feel to me in very much tension with the one killing the other. Please comment.
Can we have both?
Yeah.
Can we have both?
I love
because the day is long, and then you do your work, and then you come back and have sushi.
I want to say I love Shai Held. I mean, this is one of the most glorious Divrei Torah on Sukkot, or really any piece of life, and it's also so compelling. This idea that my ordinary can be elevated, it's core to our Jewish idea, Kodesh and Chol, that we can make the Chol Kodesh. But it's not the only interpretation of what Sukkot is doing. And in fact, it's actually not ordinary for me to go outside. It's not part of my everyday for me to sit in a sukkah, nor was it part of the Jewish people's daily experience. Although it was for a period of time, it was historically unique. It was long. There was a long period of time that we got through it, but we were actually sheltered by God in these weird huts in the desert. And there's something about that moment, I think, that can make the bridge to this action-oriented piece, because we're not simply going to Whole Foods and getting our sushi and doing the things that we normally do. We're putting ourselves in uncomfortable places to find joy in the precarious, not only joy in what we already have, but the joy, forcing ourselves to see that life is limited and precarious, and that our roofs don't always actually protect us from the rain, and find joy in the fact of, as Dan said, the things that we do have on a daily basis. If you go back, wait, one more thing. I know I'm talking for a long time. I'm sorry. But one last thing about that last verse, if you go back into the piece that you had us read about Sukkot, it is that day that we have or the 7 days that we have where the slaves actually get to rejoice with us, that's also unique. That's an exemption to the rest of our year. We're creating this world that we hope that we could have momentarily, so that perhaps we can inspire ourselves to create it for all eternity.
So here's my question. If we all have great Sukkot experiences, we're in the sukkah, the weather holds up, we're socially distant, it's COVID appropriate, we have beautiful evenings, we have black bean soup and wine and a good food, and it's a wonderful night, and we feel just, time, love, experience, right? Have we helped the world at all?
Can
Have
I
we helped
jump in
our
on that?
country at all?
So one of the things I think is really interesting about this class is timelining. And if you look at an agricultural schedule, the plants that we're harvesting at Sukkot would have probably been planted before Tisha B'Av. So in other words, like all through that destruction, all through the action words, all through this moment, our plants are growing. And I could see this on a continuum of action. You feel the brokenness that exists in your world and allow yourself to be open to that desolation and that hopelessness. Then you move to a place where you are continuing to feel the brokenness, but you're moved to action. You're identifying the ways that you're going to move. And then you get to Sukkot. And what brings you joy is recognizing the resources that you already have that have been with you all along that are going to fortify you as you move forward and do your holy work.
So my interpretation on this, I like what you said, Alisa. My interpretation is that there is room in our lives for both things. We have to do better. We can change the world. We can do better. We can visit more, immigrants in jail. We can do more concerts for the African American community to raise funds. We can do so many other things, and yet we have to be happy and content with what we have and appreciate the ordinary days.
Yeah, so you can't argue with that, but I just wanted to point out a danger. In theory, you're right, why not and? Why not both? In theory, why not both? We do all that good work, and we come home to our family and have a nice dinner, okay? But I think as a practical matter, I think often the joy of the quotidian kills the energy to make change. Here's a word that you hear a lot about, right? Which is we live in a bubble. And a bubble is both, it's safe and it's protective, but it also, in a way, limits our impact on what goes on outside of the bubble. And I think as a spiritual matter, spiritual practice, it's worth pointing out, I love our bubble. I love our bubble. And I think our bubble has the very serious downside, spiritually speaking, of dampening our fires to change the world beyond our bubble. And I think, so to me, the tension here, the play is, yes, if you can do both, if you can do Isaiah and joy, as Shai Hel talks about it, quotidian joy, fabulous. The question I want to leave us with is, does quotidian joy kill Isaiah? Is it possible to actually do quotidian joy and Isaiah?
And I think this is why we read Kohelet on Sukkot, because it actually reminds us that we're v'samachta b'chagecha and v'chol zaman 8. We have both simultaneously in the liturgy, So I think that's part of it also. And I think that gives the answer to that.
I think you're right, Wes. I think you're right. It's an interesting question. I have to be very honest. If Friday at noon you come and you say to me, "Hey, Elias, let's go downtown and let's join a march," and I say to you, "Well, I have a tennis match now scheduled,"
Right,
and I don't know, I need the time for me to relax before Shabbat and the long weekend, a lot of work, Sukkot and stuff. I don't know, I probably go with the tennis match. And that bubble makes you, have last touch with the world, with the real world.
There is something so seductive and beautiful about a bubble. It's full of quotidian joy. But I remember when, several years ago, Elise and I were visiting Queen in the House of Corrections. There's a part of, and it's 20 minutes from here. There's a whole area from where we parked to the House of Corrections with people just strung out with, shots in their, their
Methadone mile.
What's it called?
Methadone mile, I think.
Methadone mile. Just a bunch of drug addicts that are 20 minutes away, and you walk past the methadone addicts on your way to, and it's just, there's a way in which we put blinders on to focus on our bubble. And so to me, the big question is, can you do both? Can you do the joy without, I'll tell you something. I'm reading now Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Leadership in Turbulent Times. She talks about Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Baines Johnson. And you know what they all had in common? They were all depressed. They were all depressed. Each one of these presidents, great presidents, regularly struggled with depression because, which isn't to say that they didn't find, FDR would have cocktails even in the middle of the war where you're not allowed to talk about the war. So he tried to create an island of joy and that's right. But there's a sense in which I feel like we have to name the tension that each of them, Lincoln, Teddy, FDR, and LBJ, like if you're really going to grapple with the problems of our day, you're depressed because you can't solve them in 4 days. And you don't want to say, hey, slaves, come here and and they're all, if you read her book, which is such a brilliant book, they're all depressed. They're all 4 out of 4 depressed. So I think it takes some work to do the work of fixing brokenness and also figure out joy in your bubble.
And what about if that bubble can lead us to a place where we are grateful for what we have, as Dan had said, in such a profound way that we feel that we can't hold on to our bubble anymore, only to ourselves? What if you could take in this Deuteronomy text here and say, wow, 7 days I've been here with these people who are not normally people who I interact with, the slaves and the widows and the orphans. And you know what? I've rejoiced with them, and I don't want to stop that. And maybe this V'hayita ach sameach is not what we do on those 7 days, but what we have the potential to do for the rest of time if we can truly learn the message of rejoicing with others.
So this is your meta Isaiah on the whole thing. Isaiah says the point of the fast is not the fast, but it's to inspire you to act. And you're saying, your meta Isaiah is that the point of the joy is not only the joy, but the point of the joy is to inspire you to act.
To keep the joy.
Right.
To create a world where that joy can remain.
Can be, right, and where the joy is broadly shared. Mm-hmm. Well, as my dear friend and colleague Michelle Robinson would say, Kain Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shalom. Shkoach, everybody.